And there we go. Well, Clint, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here. Really interested in learning, as much as we can about your company, SaferMe, how life is in New Zealand. But generally, tell me a little bit about your background, how you got into this, and what your goals are.
Well, SaferMe is traditionally been a proximity-based safety product. We've been around a couple of years, servicing large companies. And when this all happened, we actually had a lot of the underlying technology needed for contact tracing. Mm-hmm. And contact tracing for business is a segment that's in great demand at the moment, and it's really needed. So that's what we're doing 100% of the time. All our developers are working on it, and we've already got a product in market and pretty focused on it. Happy to talk about any background at all in that segment. It's really an evolving space for sure.
So what does SaferMe do exactly?
Contact tracing for business, it's all about helping a company respond before a positive outbreak. So that means there's a contact table which is accessible inside the business to the health and safety people and HR people for each worker. And so inside the business, if you meet one person, if you come near a worker as you're going about your job, that will be recorded automatically and put in the contact table for later. If you were to say, hey, I feel sick today, yep, your manager can come in and say, all right, well, you've been in touch with these three people. Do you work with them? How often? Okay, great. Let's have them stay home and get them tested and just make sure we try and protect the rest of the workforce. So that's what SaferMe delivers.
So was this the focus of the business before the pandemic, and or did it pivot because of the pandemic? How did this come about?
Yeah, it started about 3 months ago. So at the very beginning, so we started seeing people using us for contact tracing early on. So we have existing customers all around the world. We've got, but we specialize in a very niche area. So we specialize in proximity-based safety apps, which, as you can imagine, it's extremely useful to some of our clients. Literally will protect you and send you a warning as you're approaching a mine shaft. So you're walking along as a worker, you're out in the field surveying gold deposits or iron ore deposits in the middle of nowhere. We would send you a photo of a mine shaft as you're sort of 100 meters away and say, don't fall in this hole. Like that's our really niche safety app focus. And it's its own special thing that we think needs to be built. And we've been passionate about it for a long time, that we think safety as a function needs to be much better.
I think there are some people there that, that in general, people might need that just for themselves, like not to fall into a manhole while they're maybe looking at their phone, right?
Yeah, if you think about the technology everyone's got, a lot of that's not really being used in a business sense how it should be, which is, the phones we have in our pockets. So we just do advanced safety apps and have for a long time, a few years now, and we've been growing steadily. But then it just so happened that the technology that we had in place is incredibly valuable for contact tracing. So yeah, we wrap internally, how we describe it is we wrap what's called a virtual safety bubble around each worker. As your worker's moving around and they approach a dangerous thing, we would warn that person about that dangerous thing. So we already had this technology going, and we'd already done what's called Gdpr Compliance, which is it's a data standard out of Europe. They have some protections in place for people. And that's quite important because we were already sharing location-based data from a worker to a company hierarchy, and having that done is key in contact tracing as well. And so suddenly we had half of the system done, and our existing clients were using it, and we saw them using it, and they were using it much more heavily than other parts of the product. And it was like, wow, this is kind of obvious. And the companies at that stage didn't even know what contact tracing was. It was very early on. It was, and even today, especially in America, I would say, and in countries where the outbreak's under more control, usually contact tracing is much more well known. So New Zealand, Australia, parts of Asia, the government will actually contact a business and get your contact tracing data when they're doing their own internal contact tracing, which isn't the case in most places. At least it's evolving every day, so it might have changed. If you know more than we do, let me know, but that's not the case in the United States at the moment.
Yeah, no. I mean, actually, it's funny because I have a bunch of location-based services patents from quite some time back. So I was, very familiar with anything that involves a GPS and a location. But for everybody that's listening that may not be familiar with this, so what is the definition of contact tracing as you see it?
It's really what traditionally it's what you do to try and figure out who could be infected when one individual is identified. So in practice, it may well be a group of people on the phone creating a case for someone who's sick with some sort of disease, and going through where they've been, who they've been in contact with, and figuring out who else could be infected, and trying to essentially ring fence an outbreak early, or try to get ahead of things. I mean, that's you actually, honestly, you'll know this subject much more deeply than we probably do. We're technology people that try to give our customers tools to do that for their business.
Right.
There's some real differences and nuance in contact tracing. So most people will have heard now of contact tracing apps, mostly because of the public apps that have been coming out. So Singapore led here, Israel, obviously Apple and Google have their partnership coming through for contact tracing, data sharing. But it's the business side that actually has some differences, because a business has a health and safety relationship with their staff members, and they can actually get different types of data than just a positive test. They can actually get ahead and try and get symptom data and try and act before, you get your exponential curve and it's kind of too late.
So how do you see, how does your technology work versus, say, some of the other different technologies that are out there?
I guess there's a few key differences. One is it's focused on business needs. So it's not a public facing contact tracing product. So there are those, as I mentioned, Singapore or the other apps coming out, those are very much, it's for the public. There's a lot of obviously security and privacy constraints there for good reason, to make sure that data that you report in is going to the right people and things aren't kept that shouldn't be. So we focus on the business level, which is really giving that kind of system to a company. And I guess that there's a few differences in how we deliver. Like we never let the company see where a worker is. There's no location data that's kept at the company level. Nothing's passed through, but the contact data itself, that's incredibly valuable for responding quickly. So how it works in practice is someone reports sick, your contact tracer internally at the company can quickly tap a button basically and see the automatic data logs and say, okay, these are the 8 people out of a group of 40 that perhaps should stay home or should be tested until we're sure. And then what that does for everyone else in the company is give them some assurance that there's a proper process in place. It's not paper notebooks, it's not spreadsheets. It's professional.
So this sort of brings me to the business contact tracing side of it versus the public contact tracing side of it. And I'm sort of thinking out loud, right? If everybody had your platform and there was no location data associated with it, but they could tell you who they came in contact with, that might be a way to sort of secure privacy to a much greater extent.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing to mention too is businesses can get to saturation. So if you're in the contact tracing world, kind of saturation is the goal. You want the vast bulk of your population to have a contact tracing product that stores the right amount of data. So from a business's perspective, they've got all their internal data and they can get to sort of 90% saturation usually, and that's really quite useful. Public facing products though, typically you'll get sort of 20, 30%. You might get you might get the early adopters, you know, the typical tech adoption curve. You'll get those early adopters that will almost use anything inventive. And then the early majority, though, they need to see benefit. They need to see those early adopters really getting benefit out of a public-facing app. And unfortunately, that's a missing component from the early majority and late majority inside that adoption curve. And then you've got the laggards who may never use an app if it's released to the public. So yeah, there's some clear, coming back to your question, there's really, I guess, some clear differences between a business function and a public function. And there's even more interesting and than that, in some countries we're dealing with the interface between public business as being a key spot for products as well. There's kind of like a sub-product that sits in, scans into bars and restaurants, cafes. The interface between the public and business is that's both sides need that function to really have a saturation across the group. So if you were a country, I mean, how we're talking with, I guess, a few government departments around the place now about different strategies. Our recommendation really is to have a business-focused strategy and then have a public-focused strategy, and then how you combine that data to do effective contact tracing is kind of a key. There's a bunch of key decisions they need to make.
And how are you finding, I guess there's got to be a large cultural component to this of how receptive or unreceptive people are, but how do you see the receptivity, or how are they looking at implementing this? And do you really think like right now COVID is the driving force behind this that's caused this shift?
Oh yeah. I mean, if you're a big business, you might have, say, let's assume you've got 10 factories. 2 of those factories are completely shut. And at the moment, the reason they're shut down is not because you want them to be shut, it's because some people have
right.
COVID there and workers don't come into work. And you need to get ahead of it, get ahead of positive tests. So the demand, the reason they're doing this is really money. It's aligning the interest of a business with the interest of a country, basically. The business wants to stay operating. There's already that relationship between staff member and the leadership team. They already share information and kind of in a way that their interests are aligned inside a business too. So right. Health and safety, reporting, protecting your staff members, the duty of care you have, like that all exists. Outside of business, when you're dealing with the government, people don't really want to share their data with the government. There's naturally more resistance there for probably good reason, really, but inside a business, we can get to saturation really quite quickly. Now, what we're seeing is there's immense demand from people on the ground. So if you're a worker, you want there to be a good system. Like the idea that you're writing in a paper notebook, or someone gets sick and then you've been in contact with them, but no one even tells you to stay home. Everyone in the whole business, everyone in the whole factory knows there's no effective system. And then when an outbreak's happening, they don't want to come in at all. But they've got to earn money, so they have to come in, and they're afraid to come in so it's really good to give these workers something that actually works. And we're seeing good adoption, so much faster than a safety rollout, much faster.
Yeah, you may want to talk to Elon Musk. He really wants to open his factory in California, so this may be something he may want to use with the government of California to say, I've got a way to keep track of my workers to keep the factory safe.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting in the US that companies essentially serve many of the functions of a government. So coming from New Zealand or Britain, the UK is similar, or Australia, the government has a very centralized healthcare system and centralized response to COVID. But in the US, it's often the companies will have their own testing procedures. They'll literally have their own medical staff, using data to try and figure out who to test when, who could be a super spreader, which particular people do we need to protect more than others, which traditionally is kind of a government-led thing elsewhere. So yeah, that's what we're seeing. So we're kind of a tool in the toolbox of a company that needs to respond to this. And obviously there's other tools, and we try and stick very strictly to what we deliver and try and be clear what we can and cannot do, so that, you know, they can get things done faster.
So what is your company done right now from a contract tracing perspective, specifically around this whole COVID-19 dynamic? Because I can imagine that, you know, the phone is ringing off the hook. And it's got to be like you're engaging different places and putting things in place. And where are you seeing, you know, it deployed, and where are you seeing the fruits of that labor?
Well, in New Zealand, the product is free to any New Zealand business. So the government essentially paid us to make that happen. But that, as I mentioned, the environment in a country where it's under control is slightly different, where the government is actually getting more data from a business directly. So I mean, we obviously have a lot of engagement with companies in New Zealand, and then it's interesting market by market. But then if you come into the US market, there's a great deal of demand there. What I expect to happen with contact tracing is, for the next, until the US gets it under control, I suspect it will be dealt with on a company by company basis, and potentially on a state by state basis. And I'm just an outsider looking in at your country, so you might have a better idea. But once it gets close to being under control, if that happens, it wouldn't surprise me to see mandated contact tracing for business, a bit like other countries. And so we want to be ready for that. We're obviously scaling very rapidly to deploy, and we're deploying over and over and over again. But when that happens, there'll be a second wave.
Yeah, you said something interesting there. Like, are there places where it's mandated?
Oh yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. I had no idea. I mean, we take not being traced here pretty seriously, but just sort of interesting to hear about other places and that it's a mandated process.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. So it's interesting in New Zealand, the demand profile is slightly different to the US. The US demand is actually to maintain business operations, to make money again, to actually help their, you know, which is the same thing staff members want. Like, people want to go to work and work,
right?
Want to do it safely. So the demand in the US is really top down. So you're talking C-level demand for a solution. The demand in New Zealand is different because the outbreak's under control here, but depending on the sector that you work in as a business, you actually have to do contact tracing internally. So you have to monitor who comes into contact with who. You have to have that data ready to go when it's requested. So then the Ministry of Health, which I guess would be an equivalent of, you'll have an equivalent in the United States. But when if there's a suspected case that comes in, then they might well come in and ask for your contact tracing data, get that, and then try and understand who's been in contact with who, and then try to, you know, stop the spread essentially.
So help me, because you're piquing my interest in levels of understanding on that, not necessarily maybe the security level, but how do you guys parse data on an individual? In other words, is it a de-identified sort of piece of data that's coming in and you can say, look, these 5 nodes came in contact with each other, or, but, you know, he was at the bar? I mean, you know, I'm just trying to figure out, like, how do you think about this from the individual's privacy, but also, you know, the health departments or the health groups need to know so that they can protect the broader population?
Yeah, so we try to use common sense, sensible person type tests on data that's viewable or not viewable, because a lot of this is brand new. So some of the things that are happening now haven't really been tested before. But I can tell you what we do, and the way we try to think about the trust that businesses are putting in us and our users are putting in the product.
Mm-hmm.
So SaferMe, we keep contact tracing data at the moment for 42 days. After 42 days, we let it go. We based that actually on a bowler. We couldn't really find, there are actually standards coming through for this now. So New Zealand's putting through a standard on how long data should be kept by contact tracing products.
Right.
And it's actually a different time frame. At the moment, we store it for 42 days. After that, it's gone. We obviously have the GDPR standard. So that's the European standard. It's a bit more strict than the United States. That just gives the user the right to kind of reach in and delete, or reach in and anonymize if they need to. And that's actually quite reassuring, I think, to users and the business. And then the other thing is we don't share the location of users with the business. So that's never available. There are products that do that. We could do it, but we never do. And then that means the user knows that no one knows where they are. Like even we don't have some magic view that we can see where you are. That data's not there. So that's not stored either. So, I mean, there's different levels of that. But then within the contact table itself, there's different data types. So everyone has your phone and it's your contact table, basically. It moves with you. There'll be manual contact data that goes in there. So this is when an internal worker meets with a delivery person, someone, could be anyone unexpected that doesn't have the app. If they have the app, then you've got some data already stored. And then we have second and third order contacts in a contact table as well, which basically is a bit like LinkedIn. You meet with someone, they meet with someone, but they were sick and the timing was right where it could have come to you. That's available so that you can see that. We store the amount of times that you've been in contact with someone. So that's a key metric. So why that matters is that, accuracy of tracking is not perfect. We don't tell the business you've got a perfect record. We tell the business this is a good starting place to do your contact tracing. But you might meet with someone 40 times over 7 days in the system. And that's a good indication you're probably right next to them at work, or you meet with them all the time.
Right.
That's a good indication that if you get sick, that person probably should stay home or have some precautions, get tested. And that's how we try to stop and eliminate within a workforce. The alternative is wait for a positive test, then do contact tracing, which it gets out of control. Like there might be 30 or 40 people that could have it in a whole factory that can't really operate anymore. So there's no comparison in that sense. When it comes to the sort of privacy level of the data itself, trying to get back to your original point, you've got different types of contact data, and then you've got different types of users. As a business, you can see your people, basically. You can see the contact between your workers. You cannot see the contact between your workers and the public if they have the app, or your workers and other workers if they have the app. We're trying to work through how to combine companies that want to share data across company, but sometimes they don't. So by default, you can't, but the data is there if requested by law. So if it has to be delivered to the health authorities by law, then we can work through that and make it happen for the company. But it doesn't, unless the company tells us to do something, it's not going anywhere. It's staying with them.
And you basically would sort of, like, during a situation like this, depending on the disease or whatever, have to adjust timeframes, right? Because something like COVID that has this 2-week incubation period where people can get infected, I'm sure that you have to go back and run your reports to see who came in contact with who over the last 2 weeks, let's say.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly what a contact table is. Yeah. I mean, you push a button and the data's that exactly is what we present. And then so inside a company, they have a contact tracing person or people, and then their job is to respond quickly, try to work within the policy that the company needs to have. So for example, some companies, if you're serving the public, in 1,000 stores, you might have a slightly different policy for how long ago one of your other staff members would need to be before you think that person's safe. It might be different. but one of the things in the contact table was the last time you met that person. So that's
Right.
a key thing. So in other words, if you've met someone 80 times and the last one was 8 days ago, if you've got a policy internally that we only really tell people from 4 days ago that they could be at risk. So that's really up to the medical advisors in these companies. And, you know, they've got their own teams of people on this.
So what do you see for the future of the company post-COVID, which I don't know what post-COVID is yet, but I have a feeling it's going to be around for quite some time. But, you know, how do you see this rolling forward for the company?
For SaferMe, I mean, I think contact tracing is going to be with us as a new product type. It's obviously going to burn hot, to use, you know, burn hot for 2 or 3 years, I think. But what we try to focus on is safety directly. So, I mean, our competitors, we believe, focus too much on compliance, too much on paperwork and processes. But what we think the future is that literally there will be products that are built to protect you. Like there will be systems and services and agents, intelligent agents that help you not hurt yourself, that help you do what you want to do when you're being your best self, which we're not always being. Sometimes we make mistakes. And those services will drastically reduce the amount of injuries and accidents that happen to people. Like in the future, you won't accidentally hurt yourself or get sick without knowing the risk in advance if you want to. Like these sorts of systems will be incredibly advanced compared to today. And that's essentially what we build. I guess another way to look at it is at any point in time, it feels like our society thinks of ourselves as too safe or, you know, overprotected. But if you were to rewind the clock and go back to when the Golden Gate Bridge was built, I think something like 29 people died building that bridge, something like that. That was seen as a success. You know, at the time,
you could do that back then, yeah.
Outcome, yeah? Like today, we literally have, I think it's something like 6,300 people a day die at work through to illness, and it's more now because of COVID, but that's the average. Through to injury, accidents and illness at work. That's going to be incredibly low in the future. We're 100 years from today, we're going to look back at today and go, that's crazy that they did that. So the question is not if that will happen. The question is when, how will that happen? Who's going to do it? Are we ready to do it? And my take is that the COVID-related contact tracing product we are rolling out is the first kind of wave of that change. And then the other features we already have, like we've already got a bunch of features that literally try to protect a worker. I mean, we can just roll those in. So that's our future. Focus on COVID, solve this problem for businesses, solve it over and over and over again, and then keep protecting workers.
Well, that sounds great. You know, it was great to talk to you. I'm glad we had the time. What is the time difference between New Zealand? It's
but it's 8:30 in the morning here, and this is my 4th coffee of the day.
Oh, okay, there you go. Yeah, now that'll tell you.
There's been a few sales meetings this morning, so.
Excellent. Well, I really appreciate the time, and it was great to talk to you, and I'm glad the listeners got to learn a little bit about contract tracing.
No worries, mate. Great to meet you.